I poured another cup of coffee before heading back to the kitchen table. My son-in-law was already mid-sentence. He had been speaking for roughly 10 minutes straight, and during my 2 years of living under his roof, I had learned that the smartest approach when he got going was to just let him finish. Stepping in only gave him more fuel. My daughter sat right next to him, her hands clasped on the table. She wasn't making eye contact with me. She was staring at the sugar bowl. "The math just doesn't add up anymore, Dad," my son-in-law said. His name is Cody. He deals in commercial real estate, possesses a handshake that could split a walnut, and has never once in 12 years asked me a question he hadn't already answered for himself. Between the mortgage, the bills, the property tax, we're maxed out. Sylvia and I have discussed it. We believe it's only right that you pitch in. I wrapped both hands around my mug. The coffee was still steaming. "Pitch in?" I asked. $1,400 a month, he stated. Which honestly, for a basement flat in Oakville, is under market value. You know that. I did know that. I also knew it wasn't a basement flat. It was the lower level of the house my daughter and I had bought together. My name on 40% of the title. My retirement savings covering the gap her and Cody's mortgage couldn't reach. I knew all of that. I held the paperwork to prove every cent of it. I smiled at him the way you smile at someone who has just predicted rain when you already have an umbrella in your pack. "Let me mull it over," I said. He appeared taken aback. He'd anticipated resistance, I suppose. Or tears. Something he could manage. "Sure," he replied. "Of course, take a few days." That night, after they'd gone to sleep, I sat at the small desk in my room and unzipped the accordion folder I kept in the bottom drawer of my bureau. I'd started keeping it 2 years ago, the month I moved in. At the time, I told myself I was just being orderly. I was 63 years old and recently a widower, and my daughter had offered me a room, and I had accepted because I didn't know what else to do. But some intuition built over 31 years of working as an insurance adjuster, told me to keep files. So I did. My wife, Marguerite, passed in the spring of 2021. Pancreatic cancer from diagnosis to the finish was 11 weeks, which the medical staff told us was actually swifter than normal, as if that were a relief. She was 61. We'd been intending to spend her first year of retirement touring the Trans-Canada, pulling over wherever we felt like pulling over. We had a list on the fridge. Peggy's Cove, Lunenburg, Gros Morne. The list remains on my fridge. I brought it with me when I sold the place in Guelph. Sylvia is our only child. She was 34 when her mother died. She'd been wed to Cody for 6 years by then, and they owned the house in Oakville and were talking about building a family. A few months after the service, she phoned me on a Sunday afternoon and said she'd been reflecting, and she didn't like the thought of me wandering around in the Guelph place alone, and what did I think about relocating closer? I want to be truthful about something. I wasn't duped. Not entirely. I chose to move in and I chose to put my name on that deed and I chose to hand over my funds. I was lonely and hurting, and my daughter was offering me a home to belong to. I am not telling this story to make myself sound helpless, because I was not helpless. Because I was not helpless. I was hopeful. There is a distinction. We sat down with a property agent that autumn. Sylvia and Cody's home had increased since they purchased it, but they required more room if they were going to have kids, and Cody had spotted a property in Oakville, a 4-bedroom with a finished lower floor on a ravine lot that he claimed was a once-in-a-generation find. Their borrowing limit at the bank was $180,000 short of the asking price. I had $300,000 in RRSPs that I'd transferred after Margaret passed. I also had the cash from the Guelph house once it closed. We sat with a financial consultant, Cody's financial consultant, I should clarify, and mapped out a deal. I would contribute $215,000. My name would go on the title at 40%. The lower level would be my living quarters, and the agreement was that it would stay my living quarters for as long as I required it. There was no formal contract past the deed. Cody stated a formal contract would be offensive given that we were family. I remember thinking that was a peculiar thing to say. I didn't contest it. The first year was fine. Better than fine, honestly. Sylvie and I would share coffee in the mornings before Cody left for the bureau. I assisted with tasks around the house, the kind of assistance that doesn't carry a cash value, but that a household observes when it's missing. I chauffeured Sylvie to checkups when Cody was swamped. I built furniture. I coded the driveway in August because Cody had obtained 3 estimates and told me all 3 were daylight robbery. I was useful, and being useful helped with the heartache. The second year was different. Cody had a good run at work. A major commercial transaction closed in January, and he purchased a new truck, and then he started talking about a remodel. He wanted to turn the main floor study into a proper dining area and widen the kitchen. I joined in on the early discussions because it was my house, too. Then one afternoon the builder came by for a walkthrough, and I realized I hadn't been looped in. Sylvie appeared uneasy when I walked upstairs. Cody said they'd catch me up later. They did catch me up later. The remodel would cost more than they anticipated. They were looking at choices. One of the choices, apparently, was to refinance. I discovered this not from them, but from a notice that arrived addressed to Sylvie and Cody from their mortgage provider, praising them on the approval of their refinancing request. I placed it on the kitchen counter and waited. Cody arrived home at 6:30. He looked at the envelope. He said they'd been intending to mention it. How much? I inquired. $85,000, he said. It's a good rate. The remodel will add value to the estate. I asked him if he'd weighed that I owned 40% of that estate, and that taking on extra debt against it without my awareness or approval was something I might have had views on. He said he'd assumed I wouldn't mind, seeing as I was living there rent-free. That was the first instance he used that term. Rent-free. I filed it away. I phoned my brother Gordon, the single person from my past life I spoke to consistently. He resides outside of Kingston, manages a small electrical contracting firm, and has very little tolerance for nonsense. I recounted what had occurred. He was silent for a second. "You're on the deed," he said. 40%. Then they can't refinance without your signature. I know, but they did. More silence. You preserved the original closing papers? He asked. I have everything. Good, Gordon said. Don't say anything else to them yet. Retain a lawyer. I already had a name, a woman I'll call Victoria. Because that's her name. Victoria Asamoah. A real estate attorney in Mississauga who'd been suggested by a coworker of Marguerite's. I'd looked her up the evening the refinancing notice arrived. I hadn't phoned yet. I was still praying I was mistaken about what was occurring. I was not mistaken about what was occurring. 2 days after the chat about the refinancing, Cody placed a printed matrix on the kitchen table during breakfast and nudged it across to me. He said he and Sylvie had been constructing something to help establish standards going forward. He said it in the tone he uses when he's claiming that an idea just hit him when you know he's been practicing it. The matrix was split by category. There was a line for housing, $400 per month. A line for shared bills, $180. A line for what he termed property upkeep contribution, $75. At the base, in bold, a monthly sum of $1,655. I looked at my daughter. She was staring at her phone. Sylvie, I said. She looked up. She had the look of someone who has consented to something they knew was unfair and has now concluded the only way out is through. I recognized it. I had watched her display that look at 15 when a friend coaxed her into something she shouldn't have done. And I'd watched her display it at 22 when she'd remained in a bad partnership 3 months longer than she should have. I knew that face. We've both been feeling the strain, she said. Financially. You refinanced for $85,000, I said. Without my signature on the paperwork. Cody said the institution had processed it based on Sylvie's ownership status. He said the way the title was set up gave her full power to act. I said nothing. I made a record of exactly what he'd stated. The way I used to record what clients said on the phone before they knew I was logging it down. That afternoon, I called Victoria. Victoria is a petite woman with a very blunt delivery and an office packed with greenery. She sat across from me at her desk, skimmed through the papers I'd brought, and then joined her hands and told me what I already suspected. The refinancing should not have advanced without my approval. 40% ownership was not a passive stake. I had co-ownership rights and duties, and the bank's handling of the request without my endorsement was, at minimum, a clerical blunder and potentially something more grave if my endorsement had been copied. She used the word copied. She said she'd like to demand the mortgage papers from the lender to check the signature page. I told her about the matrix. The $1,655 per month. She noted something down. She asked me what resolution I was seeking. I told her I wanted what was mine. I told her I wasn't looking to punish my daughter. I told her I recognized that Cody was the mastermind of this and that Sylvie had allowed herself to be persuaded and that I wanted a fix that didn't force me to smash what was left of my family if I could avoid it. Victoria nodded. She said she'd be in touch. I did not mention anything to Sylvie or Cody about the attorney. I went about my days. I consented to pay $300 a month toward bills, which I presented as a sign of goodwill. Cody took this with an air of nobility that I found genuinely stunning. He truly did think he was winning. I started looking at flats, not seriously, not yet, just to know what was available. There was a project going up in Burlington, a 15-minute drive from where my brother resided, fair rates for the zone, a waiting list that was advancing. I placed my name on the list. I told no one. Victoria phoned me 3 weeks later. She had obtained the mortgage papers from the firm. The signature on the co-ownership clearance form was mine. My name, my date of birth, my residence. It was not my signature. The letter scripts were close, but they weren't right. She'd had a writing reviewer take a tentative look. He agreed the signature had been traced, not written. She asked me how I wished to proceed. I told her to proceed the way she deemed was right. She said she would dispatch a formal notification to the mortgage firm and to my son-in-law declaring them of the contested signature and the co-ownership rights and demanding that the refinancing funds be frozen pending clarity. She said this would not be a subtle notification. I said I understood. I was in the garden when Cody got home that evening. I was doing nothing in particular, standing near the hedge, staring at the ravine, which was packed with birch trees that had just started to turn. I heard the truck door slam. I heard him head inside. I heard, a few minutes later, what sounded like a stool scraping the kitchen floor. I took my time heading inside. Cody was standing at the kitchen island. He held the notification in his hand. Sylvie was sitting at the table. And when I walked in, she stared at me with a look I had not observed on her face since she was a youth and had done something she couldn't fix. It was not fury. It was something closer to comfort. The way folks sometimes look when a thing they've been dreading finally lands and they realize they can stop being afraid. You retained a lawyer, Cody said. I did, I said. This notification is claiming my signature was forged. The notification states the signature on the clearance form is being disputed, I said. That's accurate. He dropped the note. He was very still for we can resolve this, he said. As a family. I told him I was open to that and that my attorney would be delighted to join in any family talk and that the initial step would be the mortgage firm placing the refinancing funds in escrow while we sorted out the co-ownership dispute. He didn't like that. He said placing funds in escrow would hurt their credit rating. I said I understood and that I was sorry and that I hoped we could settle things swiftly. I went downstairs. I prepared myself dinner. I was not as serene as I'm making this sound, but I was calmer than I expected to be. Sylvie tapped on my door after 10 o'clock. She sat on the edge of the seat by the window, the one Marguerite used to sit in when she read, and she didn't say anything for a bit. I waited. I didn't know he was going to do the signature, she said. I want you to be certain on that. Okay, I said. I knew about the refinancing. I agreed to it. I told myself your name being on the deed was just that it was nominal that you'd be fine with it. She paused. I persuaded myself of a lot of things this past year. I told her I knew. I told her that was the element that had stung most. Not the cash. Not the matrix. Not even the signature. The persuading herself. The staring at the sugar bowl. She started to weep. I let her weep for a bit and then I brewed tea and we conversed until almost midnight. Not about the legal matter. Not about the cash. About her mother. About what the second year of mourning does to a person. Which is different from the first year and something no one cautions you about. About how much I yearned for Marguerite. About how much she did too. I did not tell her about the Burlington flat. That wasn't the right moment. The legal route took 4 months. Victoria was disciplined and exact and absolutely unfazed by the stalls Cody's lawyer created. The writing reviewer turned in his report in January. The signature on the co-ownership clearance form was not matching with my authentic signatures across multiple proven documents. The mortgage firm, facing its own liability danger, acted swiftly after that. There were tense discussions about how the slip, the firm chose to call it a slip, had been processed without proper checking. In the end, the refinancing was adjusted. My co-ownership rank was formally established. The funds that had already been paid out and spent on the remodel were handled through a payback plan, Cody's payback plan, not mine. Victoria also hammered out a formal co-ownership pact, the one we should have signed 2 years prior, that outlined my rights plainly and in print and with no confusion whatsoever about what 40% actually meant. I signed the pact. And then I gave my notice. Not out of malice. I want to be clear about that. I gave my notice because the Burlington flat had become open sooner than anticipated, a corner spot on the 8th floor, and because I had realized sometime during those 4 months that what I actually desired was a home that was completely mine, not 40% mine, not mine by setup mine. I told Sylvie first on a Sunday morning in February. I told her before I told Cody. She sat with it for a minute, then asked me if she could assist me move. I told her I'd like that. Cody and I have not spoken much since. We are civil at family gatherings. I believe in his version of the narrative. I am the antagonist, the father-in-law who sued instead of working things out like family. I have made my peace with that. A man who could persuade himself that using another person's signature was a processing slip is capable of persuading himself of almost anything. Sylvie rings me on Sundays now. Sometimes we talk for an hour. She and Cody are still together. That's her life and her choice, and I will not deny I don't hope things improve between them because she's my daughter and I love her. But she also told me a few months after I moved out that she'd started seeing a counselor. She said she was working on the trait of herself that stares at the sugar bowl when she knows something is wrong. I thought that was a good thing to be working on. I'm writing this from my kitchen table on the 8th floor of a tower that smells like fresh paint and potential. The St. Lawrence is not visible from this pane. I'm too far west for that. But on clear days I can spot the ridge. And in the mornings the light enters at an angle that Marguerite would have enjoyed. I keep her list on the fridge. Peggy's Cove, Lunenburg, Gros Morne. I'm still going to tour the Trans-Canada. Maybe not this year. Maybe in the spring. When folks ask me what I would have done differently, I tell them get everything in print. Not because you don't believe in your family, because you do. Because the things we do in trust are the ones we most require to be able to look at cleanly later when trust has become twisted by cash and mourning and the quiet stresses that build up in a shared house over 2 years. And keep the file. The accordion file in the bottom drawer. Keep the records and the dates and the alerts and the notes from phone chats. Not because you're expecting trouble, because you love your daughter. And because you learned 31 years into a career of sorting out other people's blunders that hope and preparation are not opposites. They are, when you get it right, the very same thing. People ask me whether I regret moving in with my daughter and her husband. They expect me to say yes. It would make for a cleaner moral. Old man makes a blunder, pays for it, cautions others. But the true answer is more intricate than that. I don't regret moving in. I regret moving in without a sheet of paper. There's a version of those 2 years that could have gone differently if I had sat down with an attorney before I signed anything, before I turned over $215,000 and my name on a deed and the quiet belief that family meant safety. The whole script shifts, not because Cody is a fundamentally different person, but because people conduct themselves differently when the borders are written down. That's not cynicism. That's just something I learned in 31 years of examining claims. Certainty doesn't break relationships. Uncertainty does. What I've come to grasp is that what happened wasn't mandatory. It was the effect of a string of small choices, mine and theirs, that built up over time until they became a fix none of us could easily step back from. I chose to trust an unwritten pact. Sylvie chose to look at the sugar bowl. Cody chose to read my charity as compliance. Every one of those choices had a fallout. And the fallout landed on schedule, the way they always do. I'm not angry about it anymore. I was for a while. Not the loud kind of angry, more the quiet, sleepless kind that sits with you at 2 o'clock in the morning and replays chats. What I kept coming back to during those months was Sylvie's face when I stepped into the kitchen and she realized the notice had arrived. That look I recognized from when she was 15. She knew. She had known for a long stretch and she had stayed silent because staying silent was easier than the alternative. That's the element I think about most. Not the fake signature, not the matrix, not the $1,655 a month for a place I part-owned. The staying silent. Because I understand it. I do. Mourning makes you flexible. It makes you want to cling to what you have. And if clinging means not making waves, you stop making waves. I had done my own version of it that first year when I told myself the refinancing chat could wait. The hard thing about letting things drift is that they don't actually drift. They build. What pulled me through wasn't valor, and it wasn't anger, and it wasn't some grand choice to battle back. It was the accordion file in the bottom drawer. It was 31 years of professional routine that had taught me, quietly and without fuss, to write things down, to keep the papers, to note what people say when they assume you're not paying attention. That routine, that small, unglamorous habit, turned out to be the most vital asset I brought into that house. So Bea told me she started seeing a counselor, that she's working on the trait of herself that goes silent when she knows something is wrong. When she told me that, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Pride. Not because she's fixing something I needed her to fix, because she spotted something true about herself and chose to do something about it. That takes more grit than most folks realize. I think about Marguerite often when I sit at this kitchen table. She was the bolder one in most matters. She would not have waited as long as I did, but she also would have told me at the end of it that the goal was never the house. The goal was knowing what you're worth and being willing eventually to stand up and say so. I'm still learning that at 65 in a corner spot in Burlington with the ridge out the pane and her list still on my fridge. It's not too late to learn it. That's the thing I'd most want someone to take from this.